In the late 80s, De Tomaso still owned Maserati, and these were very dark times for the company. The cars were unreliable and pretty dreadful to drive as well. But amid a sea of duds, and with barely 2 lira to rub together, Maserati pulled a true gem out of the hat, the Shamal. I don't know of any other car that combines fear with adoration quite like this one does. Let's find out more. A big thanks to Maserati Club UK who helped me source this beautiful car. They're officially recognised by the factory, so if you have a Maserati, old or new, do consider joining up. I'll put the details in the video description. By the late 80s, the Biturbo project was a failure. The early cars were truly awful. But over the years, Maserati had quietly improved quality and drivability, and the late cars were actually decent. But decent wasn't enough to get sales, so De Tomaso decided to take one last desperate roll of the dice. The idea? To make a flagship so awe-inspiring that it would reignite interest in the whole Maserati range. They'd attack on 3 fronts: sharp handling, outrageous looks, and most important of all, a fearsome new engine. Underneath, the front end used McPherson struts and power-assisted rack and pinion steering taken from the later model Biturbos. But at the rear, there was an all-new tubular trailing arm suspension system, far more sophisticated than before. And to make it even more advanced, they worked with Koni to develop one of the very first adaptive suspension systems. So what you had here is a control box with settings from 1 to 4. And at the push of a button, you could go from hard to supple. It was styled by Gandini, who was restrained in having to use the Biturbo's basic architecture. But the result is still one of the most striking cars ever made. The cartoonish look makes for one of those radical redesigns of all time. Notice the massive box arch flares, and at the back, that typical Gandini slash, which was also there in the early Countachs, and then the truly bizarre front spoiler, which I don't think has ever been repeated, but just looks right. It's one of my favourite designs of all time, but as wild as it looked, the real story was under the bonnet. Distinct from other members of the family, the Shamal had a brute of a quad cam, twin turbo, 3.2 litre V8, which produced 322 horsepower, but more importantly, 328 foot-pounds of torque at just 2,800 RPM. And I think that goes some way towards explaining the reputation that it has. It was enough to push this from 0 to 60 in just 5.2 seconds. And let me put that into context. That was quicker in 1990 than a Ferrari Testarossa. But that speed came at a cost. Let's just say that it's supposed to be quite an intimidating car to drive. We'll see if it lives up to that in a moment, but first a word about the interior. I've always loved the interior of the Biturbos. They were so over the top, almost like a Venetian brothel. Here, all in black, it's slightly toned down, but it still has those unmistakable Maserati details. So the incredible overstuffed central armrest, which is probably one of the most comfortable that I've ever used. Of course, the golden, intricate Maserati clock, and the Shamal has some unique seats that were only used in this car. But now, let's take it out and see if it lives up to the legend. Now it's odd, when you first take off at slow speeds, there's a few little clunks coming from the back that initially I thought was driveline shunt, but on reflection, I think it's probably the limited slip diff, which is just a little bit noisy at very slow speeds. Now, although it was a huge success in terms of the reception that it got from journalists, because everybody loved the Shamal, they were just delighted that Maserati had finally managed to come up with a decent car, but really, it was still a failure because they only managed to sell 369 of them. So in a way, that's a shame. I think it deserved to do more, but at the time it was an incredibly expensive car. And also, I think it adds now to the mystic quality that this car has, that there's just so few of them around. When, if ever, have you seen one of these? I think I might have seen one once at a car show before today. I mean, it's just fantastic. Something else I'll bring straight up is I did a review a couple of years ago of a Ghibli Cup, which is a model which was based on this but came later on. And I absolutely loved it, but one of the main issues that I had with that car is that I didn't fit in it. And I don't understand why in this one I fit absolutely perfectly. In the Ghibli Cup, I couldn't bring the seat far enough back. It was hitting the rear tunnel. As far as I know, it's the same chassis, and yet on this, I'm fine. I think that the main reason might be these special seats, that they're just a bit more sculptured at the back and they give me a little bit more room. Having said that, although the cabin is light and airy because old style, they don't have massive pillars and so on, you still don't have a huge amount of room, particularly in terms of leg room. It's quite cramped down there and the pedal box is a little bit offset to the right. Now, thankfully, this is almost 100% standard, this car. The only two differences are the steering wheel, which is an aftermarket Momo, and this shift knob here, which is also a Momo, I think from one of the later cars. And I have to say, this gear change is an absolute delight. It really is. It's not the most mechanical in feel, but what it lacks in feel, it gets in just crisp lightness. It's so easy, so nice, and so light to use. It's a real delight. The thing is, you don't particularly have to use it because it may be just the 3.2 litre V8, but it feels like a much bigger engine. Now we're coming up to the bit that I and all of you have been waiting for, and that is to unleash this devil of an engine. And just got to mention before that, it has been raining. I think it's dried out a bit now, but I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Now, the way that the pedal is placed, it's actually quite hard to fully depress it, and also it seems to get more resistance as it goes right back down to full travel. So I don't think I was actually getting full power there, so we will redo that. But even from there, you can see that this is indeed a muscular beast. Where I can feel it immediately though is in fourth gear, put your foot down, and then, wow, it really impresses from about 3,000 revs, which is around peak torque, so it makes sense. This thing springs forward. Feels like a very, very muscular car indeed. That gearbox is snickety perfect. It's lovely, it's light and crisp, and immediately I'm feeling at home in this thing, and I'm not surprised because I loved the Ghibli Cup so much, and this really isn't too different from that. I also like the steering. It's so direct, and of course the car is so short that it responds really well to steering inputs. The suspension there, because the thing is with these systems, none of them work, so I'm quite shocked. It does appear to be working on this car. There isn't a huge difference between stiffest and softest setting. It's not like 4 is rock hard and then 1 is soft, but to me, I can definitely tell a difference, so that's nice and reassuring. The adaptive suspension is working. 6 gears, haven't even gone into 6th yet. On this road, you don't need to. It's more like an overdrive, and it's so responsive to the steering. Off center, there's a little bit of give there, and then as soon as it loads up, it feels like it wants to turn more. 3rd gear for this, I don't think we need more. Oh, unfortunately, there's some cars in front of us, but we'll go the other way as well. So I am treading quite gingerly because this has a reputation, and they're such rare cars. The last thing I want to do is lob it into the hedge, but I'll be a bit more adventurous on the way back out. Apart from that, the interior, as I said, it still has that basic biturbo architecture, so it's still quite, it's still recognisably Italian, but it's a little bit toned down from the first cars. And now we're back, so we'll go through the gears again, and this time I am going to put my foot right to the floor. Wish me luck. To say, during normal running, the engine is pretty muted. I mean, it feels nice, spacey, refined. There we go, and there, and it is a bit of a weapon. It really is. I love the steering on these things. I don't think I've ever driven a car in which the attitude of the front end changes so much when it's on or off the power. So go into a bend on a trailing throttle, for example, and the Shamal still turns, and still turns fairly convincingly, but the moment that you feed any power, it just wants to go right for the apex. Look, 330 horsepower by modern standards, it's not a massive amount. I mean, these were relatively light, I think 1,300 or 1,400 kilos. So, you know, it's just the way it develops that power. That's what brought these legends alive, I think, about how treacherous they could be. And obviously, the road thankfully has dried out, so I'm not experiencing what it's like in the wet. I'm sure with such a short wheelbase, it would be a twitchy little beast. But so far, I think you can have fun with this car, and the steering is really responsive, but what comes across most is actually, surprisingly, it's very refined. So it's quiet, wind noise is relatively subdued, maybe something to do with that sort of bizarre front wing arrangement at the front as well, because I'm sure earlier B-turbos were plagued by being quite noisy at speed. Put the suspension in its softer setting, and the car will do that now. Actually, we'll go back. Softer setting. What I wasn't expecting it to come through, and which has done, is the GT-like nature of the Shamal. Didn't know really that that's what it would feel like it would be good at, but it does. Something else I find quite amusing about it is just have it at 2.5, put your foot down and get the boost going up just for a second, and then when you let go it makes a little noise. I don't know if you guys can hear it. It's like a little pew as it comes out of the wastegate. Love that. It's a bit like a subdued version of what you might get in a sort of 90s Impreza. Now, as much as I love it, I'm not going to pretend to you that the Shamal is perfect, because far from it. That ballistic front end with that very positive turn-in can feel a little bit unstable when you're really pushing on. And also there's the matter of the general quality of the interiors. They really did improve things by this stage, but still, it all feels quite fragile in here. Then again, if you're going to have an Italian car of this era, you've got to expect it to have the odd little fault. And that engine, it is awesome. I love it. Couple of little points of criticism though. Because it's a twin turbo V8, you do lose out a little bit on the ultimate sound, on what you could get if it was normally aspirated. But one thing you can't take away from it is that it is very smooth. If this review has made you want to get one of these, I've got good and bad news. The bad news is there's very few of them about, so you're going to really struggle to find one. But the good news is that I think they are still criminally undervalued. A car like this, I mean, this has 59,000 kilometers on it, so 40,000 miles, 35,000 miles. And I think if you were to buy one of this kind, you'd be looking at maybe, I don't know, £90,000, something like that. So they vary, if you can find one, from between 70 for the leggiest, really sort of cars needing work, I'd say, to £100,000. This is a really lovely example, but I wish you luck, and I will give you all my approval if you want to try and get yourself one of these. So what to make of the Shamal? Well, I think the stories are true. I can see why people were intimidated by it. If you want to drive it hard, it's a car which requires concentration and respect. That power delivery is brutal, and there's a fair bit of turbo lag still present here. But the very unexpected thing is that if you drive it normally, if you don't try and use up all the performance, then it's a real pussycat and a very comfortable and capable GT. It's interesting because this brute of an engine went on to be used to the 3200 GT, which came after this. So by then, Maserati was already owned by Fiat. Indeed, while this was being made, they had already been bought out by Fiat. And anyway, the 3200 GT came out, and that was far less well received than this. I did a video on one of those about a year ago, and it's quite an interesting car. I think very underrated now, and to me, the last of, well, the real Maseratis in a way. At least it had an engine which was developed and run by Maserati. If you're interested in that, do take a look at this. Massive thanks to Maserati Club UK. Do check out their website, and especially to Lucio for bringing down this car and making a dream come true. Thank you so much, and see you for the next one.